Let's continue exploring the universe within art and the art behind minigames. I'm your host, OmLedu, and in this video we're going to look at how to build Yahtzee in Minecraft. And I have two different ways that you can build the dice, one that is fancy and uses lamps as a visual guide, and the other that just uses droppers for a super simple version. This video was requested by Speak the Movie. Thank you so much for leaving a comment, leaving a request, and I really hope that you enjoy this video. The fancy version that has a visual display is basically 5 different randomizers that each have 6 different potential outputs, so it mimics rolling 5 different dice. Anytime you press the button, you will roll all 5 of the dice and it will show you what you rolled because we have number banners to mark each one. But we also have these sections that will lock those dice into place so that the next time you re-roll, those will not re-roll. And this is of course because in Yahtzee, you can roll your dice up to 3 times before marking your score down. And each time you re-roll, you can save some of those dice before you re-roll. So you could only re-roll 1 of the dice or 2 of the dice if you so desire. So that's what this machine has in mind. Near the end of the video, we will also go over how to build all of the number banners and some suggestions on having a scoreboard. You will need some way for the players to record their scores. Now you could always do this in real life on a piece of paper, or maybe even in the chat bar or by naming items, but by far the easiest way, in my opinion, would be with using number banners and item frames. But we'll go over all of that, including the banner patterns, near the end of the video. First, we will do the tutorials for how to make the rollable dice. And of course, if you just wanted to build this simple version, you totally can. This does not have a visual display, but it is much easier and cheaper to build. So you'll have to look inside all of the droppers to see which dice have been rolled, and then you can lock in the dice by flipping those levers. So right here, we're keeping the 5s, so when we re-roll, we will keep those 2 5s, and it will re-roll just the middle dice. Now compared to the super fancy version, this isn't as quick and easy to actually look and see what dice have been rolled, but it works. It's super fast and easy to build. You'll just have to look inside of each dropper to see what numbers have been rolled. So it's really up to you whether you want the simple dice or the fancy dice. Both of them will work to play the game. And we'll go over this one right after building the fancy one. But really, even the fancy version is not all that complex to build. It is a little expensive, but I tried to design it to be as easy as possible for you to understand. Basically, there's just 5 different item sorters that are all the same, tied together with a little bit of dust. And here's everything you will need in order to build the fancy version. Now these copper bulbs are technically optional, but I would highly recommend using them. If you don't, you technically won't need 6 of these comparators, but again, I would recommend using the copper bulbs. I'll explain why whenever we get to that point. And as for the redstone dust and the solid blocks, I didn't actually count these out. You will need a couple of stacks of dust and a couple of stacks of building blocks of your choice. But everything else should be in exact quantities. I did count it out by hand, so I could have made a mistake, but I'm pretty sure this is all you need. The build area is going to be 26 by 10, and so the outer border is going to be 28 by 12. And we're going to go ahead and dig down 6 blocks deep all the way across, 1 block from the front and 3 blocks from the back. This is the front of the machine, and your redstone lamp wall is going to be on top of that smooth stone. And the height of the redstone is going to be 11 blocks up. I would also start off by marking the 2 center blocks of your build area, so that you have 2 13 by 10 sections. Either way, we just need to know where the middle is, so even if you don't want to map out your build area first, we're going to start off by placing 2 pistons in the center facing up. And then we're going to place 2 more pistons on either side of those, so that we're left with 6. Then we're going to skip 3 blocks on either side and place 6 more pistons facing up, and they should end 1 block away from the edge of your build area. So now you will have 3 lines of 6 pistons that are 3 blocks apart. Then here in the front, we're going to place a line of decorative solid blocks, then redstone lamps on top of those everywhere that there is a piston. So you will have 3 rows of 6 lamps 3 blocks apart from each other that are aligned with the pistons. On top of all of the pistons, we're going to place a block of redstone. Then we're going to go up by 3 blocks on top of one of those so that we can place a piston that is facing down that has 2 blocks between it and the bottom piston, like so. And then we need these pistons facing down all the way across above where the other pistons are. These are the RS latches that control the lights. So now come to one of the sides, and 1 block away from the bottom pistons, we need to place a row of solid blocks, like so. Then adjacent to all of the pistons, we need to place a redstone torch on the side of the blocks that we just placed. And I actually missed one of the torches, so just ignore that for now. I'll replace it later on. Then we need to place target blocks right here on the edge of our 3-block hole, 2 blocks away from the back. And like with everything we've built so far, these will be aligned with the pistons as well, so you will have 3 groups of 6 that are aligned with the pistons. Then diagonally down from those needs to be solid blocks. Then diagonally up from that, 1 block away from the targets, we need solid blocks. Then we need to put dust next to the targets and on top of the blocks that we just placed. Then we need to place glass diagonally up from each target on top of the redstone. So again, we're going to align this with the pistons and everything else. Then on top of this back redstone, we're going to place solid blocks. And if you can't tell, we're actually building non-overflow protected item sorters. But on top of the targets, we need to place a temporary block so that we can place a row of solid blocks that is diagonally up from the glass going toward the front, so that the glass has solid blocks diagonally up from it on both sides. Now we need to face the back of the machine and place rows of comparators on top of the glass. Make sure that those comparators are facing the back, but then we're going to place hoppers next to these blocks on the front and make sure these hoppers are pointed into those blocks. And do this on all 3 sections. Now we need to go to the rightmost side, and diagonally from the hopper on the right, we need to place 2 temporary blocks and then 2 droppers facing up. So these bottom 2 droppers are just temporary blocks. So we're left with 2 droppers facing up that are aligned with diagonally from that hopper. Then we need a dropper facing the back, then a dropper facing the hoppers, so that we have 4 droppers in this orientation. Now we need to build the same thing on the right-hand side of the other 2 sections. So 2 temporary blocks with 2 droppers facing up, then a dropper facing the back, then a dropper facing the hopper. Again, 2 temporary blocks, then 2 droppers facing up, dropper facing back, and then dropper facing hopper. Then on the bottommost dropper, we need to place a hopper going into it, and then hoppers going into those hoppers, so that we're left with a row of hoppers going into each other, going into the droppers. Then under here, we need to place hoppers underneath the top ones, pointed into the row of hoppers that we just placed. Make sure all of those hoppers are pointed into each other, and then the front ones are pointed into the dropper. And again, we need to do the same thing on the other 2 sections. So a row of hoppers going into the dropper, then a row of hoppers going into those. Next up, we need to place a redstone torch on the side of all of the target blocks underneath the hoppers. Now we need a way for the droppers to activate. So place a solid block diagonally down from the bottom dropper next to that torch, then a solid block next to that glass, then face the back of the machine and place a comparator on that front block with an observer looking at that comparator. Now a piece of redstone dust on top of that block, with a repeater on a 3-tick delay on top of the observer facing the front. So poke that repeater 2 times. Then we need an observer facing that repeater like so. Then build the same thing on the other 2 sections. So block diagonally down from the droppers next to the torch, block next to the glass, then a comparator pointed toward the back of the machine with an observer facing that comparator, then a piece of dust up on top of this block, then a redstone repeater on a 3-tick delay on top of the observer with another observer looking at that repeater. Then just build that same thing a 3rd time. And that's why I said this is actually fairly easy to build, because we're going to build the same thing basically 5 different times, but for now we're just going to build it 3 times because the other 2 sections are up in the air. Now we need to load items into the top row of hoppers that are pointed into the blocks to work as an item sorter. Now you have 2 choices when it comes to filling these hoppers. You can either use 6 different trash items and put a single type of trash item into each hopper, so like dirt in this one, or you can use the same type of trash item to fill all of the hoppers and have a different unique item in the first slot. It doesn't matter either way, but I'll show you an example of both. So if you want to use a unique item so that you can visually see which hopper is for which number, we're going to put 3 of that item into the first slot, and then we're going to place trash items in the second slot until 2 of the first item falls through. So we're left with a single item in the first slot, then we'll have an item in this hopper right here underneath that filter hopper, then another one of that item up here in the dropper. And really, the only reasons to use unique items like I'm doing now is if you only have a single trash item that you have a bunch of, rather than having 6 different trash items, or if you want a visual guide or example of which hopper is going to trigger which number. But again, we're going to place 3 of our unique item in the first slot, and then place trash items in the last 4 slots until 2 of the unique ones fall through. So at the end of this, we should have 6 of the unique item, 1 of each, in this dropper up here, and then a single one of the unique item in these hoppers right here. If you have a trash item in these hoppers, that's bad. Take out the trash item and refix it. So you'll be left with a single unique item in the hoppers above the torches. And we're going to do this on the other two sections. But this time, instead of using unique items, I'm going to use 6 different trash items. Now these need to be 6 different trash items, and it doesn't matter what they are. So in this first one, we're going to just place dirt. So again, we need 3 of that item in the very first slot. Then we're going to place items into the second slot until 2 of the first ones fall through. And again, we should be left with 1 in this hopper in the first slot, 1 in this hopper, and then 1 up here in this dropper. And that's it. Now in the next hopper, we're going to place a completely different trash item. So we can't use dirt anymore. So now we're going to use seeds. So we're going to put pumpkin seeds in this one. Again, put 3 in the first slot, then fill the second slot until 2 of those fall through. And you cannot use non-stackable items as hopper filler. But if you're using items that stack to 64, you will be left with 18 items in the second slot. And if you accidentally put in too many items, all you have to do is take 1 out of here, then go find the extras. So there should be 1 item in this hopper right here, and there should only be 1 in these droppers right here. So just take out all of the extras, and since now you know that there's 1 of those items in this dropper, and 1 of those items in the hopper down there, you just need to place 1 more item into the first slot to fill up the hopper completely. Or if you get confused, just take them all out of the hopper and all out of the dropper and start again, placing 3 of that item into the first slot, and then items into the second slot until 2 of those fall through. And again, every single slot should have at least 1 item in it. And check it when you're done to make sure all of the back hoppers have a single item, and then make sure that this dropper has 6 of those different items, like so. Then of course, we need to do the same thing on the third section so that all of the hoppers are loaded. So again, one more time, we need to put 3 items in the first slot, then 1 item in all of the slots, then place items in the second slot until 2 of the first 3 fall through. And if you place too many items in, just go fish them out, and you should end up with 1 in each slot, 18 in the second slot, 1 in the hoppers above the torches, and then 1 in the dropper up here. So just go and take out all of the extras, and you should be good to go. Now we need to make a delivery system, so place a temporary block at the end of these hoppers, then a solid block with a lever, turn the lever on, and place powered rails on each side on top of the hoppers, with 4 regular ones in the middle, and a minecart with chest right there. Then do the same thing again, so temporary block, solid block, lever, turn it on, 2 powered rails, 4 regular rails, then a minecart with chest. Now instead of this, you could just use a row of hoppers on the top, but that's a little more expensive and it slows it down a bit. But if you want to use hoppers instead, you totally can. But now we need to go over to the leftmost side, and then skip the first row with a torch on it. So next to the second torch, we're going to place a solid block next to that block, then a solid block next to that. Then we're going to skip every other torch, placing 2 solid blocks in front of them. So skip the leftmost torch, then place a solid block on every other torch, skip the leftmost torch, and place 2 solid blocks like so. Then on each of the rows in front of the torches that we did not place blocks, we're going to dig down 1 on that middle block right there. So all the way down, aligned with the torches, anywhere that we did not place the blocks, we're going to knock out that center block. Then in each of these holes, we're going to place 3 dust, 1 under the torch, 1 in the hole, and then 1 going into the block like so. Now these back torches are powering that dust, which is turning off the front torches. Then on all of the rows that we did place solid blocks, we're going to place a repeater on the second block, and then a dust coming out of and going into that repeater. So I'm going to go through and place the repeaters first. So we're going to place a repeater facing the front on no extra delay right here on this middle block going toward that front torch. Then we're going to go through and place the 2 redstone dust coming in and out of the repeaters. And so now all of the torches on the target blocks are powering those lines, which should then be turning off the frontmost torches next to the pistons. And then I noticed that I missed this torch right here, so I'm going to go ahead and replace it. So whenever you're done with this, all of the front torches should turn off, so all of these bottom pistons should not be active. Then diagonally down from the topmost pistons, we're going to place solid blocks so that we can place redstone dust on top of these blocks next to every single piston, like so. Then we're going to come down here, and next to the frontmost lamps, we're going to place copper bulbs. And I would recommend having 5 of one color and 1 of a different color, because right here on the right side of this middle section, we're going to place the different color because that's the one that will roll the dice. Now technically, you could use lamps or just a solid block with a lever instead of the copper bulb, but it's nice to have a visual notification that that section is locked. Then place buttons on the side of each bulb, but if you don't want to use bulbs, you need to place levers instead. But whether or not you use the copper bulbs, we need to place 2 solid blocks diagonally behind each of them. Then we need to place a comparator that is looking at each of the bulbs, so be sure to face toward the back of the machine when placing those comparators. But now we need to place repeaters in front of those comparators that are facing toward the closest dust, like so. But not on the one that's a different color that's going to roll the dice. On this one, instead, we're going to place an observer that is looking at that comparator. Then place a solid block coming out of the back of that observer, then 2 solid blocks diagonally down from that, so that there's a path from the repeater to the observer. Then go diagonally up and over, then diagonally up and over again, and be sure to break out the temporary blocks as you go. Then go down by 1 and over by 1 again. So this middle section of 2 is 2 blocks above the redstone dust. Then we're going to go down by 1 more block, and then curve this around so it's in between those repeaters like so. Now we're going to place dust on top of all of these blocks that we just placed, but now the dust we just placed has connected to the dust next to the pistons, and we don't want that. So place solid blocks right there in order to pinch the redstone so that the dust no longer connects, so that you're left with a single line that does not connect to any other redstone. But now we need this dust to power these droppers. So on top of the hoppers next to the droppers, we're going to place a solid block and then a piece of glass, like so, on all 3 of these sections. So a piece of glass and a solid block. Then on top of the solid block, we're going to place a repeater on maximum delay, and then 3 redstone dust. 2 on top of the droppers, and then 1 on top of the glass, like so. And make sure these repeaters are on maximum delay, so poke them 3 times. Now we need to connect that redstone to the redstone on top of the glass. So place a block down there, then a block next to the glass, then place redstone dust on top, like so. Now this middle section is slightly different. We actually need another piece of glass next to this one, and then we need 2 blocks down there to connect the dust on top of these 3 blocks so that it runs over and connects to that repeater. But this side will be the same as the first one. All we need is 2 blocks, 1 down there, and then 1 next to the glass, like so. And we are now totally done with the bottom section. So go ahead and take this time to test it. Go poke the button to roll the dice, make sure that all of the lights turn off, and then a single light turns on every single section, and be sure to test the locking mechanisms as well. Just also don't spam the dice roll button. We'll go over why you don't want to do that later on. And we are officially more than halfway done. There's only 2 more sections left to build. But really quick, all of the builds you see here are different versions of this machine. I spent a long time designing and redesigning this, trying to come up with the best and easiest one for you to build. So if you're liking this video, please don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. But now it's time to finish up and build the upper section. So on the middle row of lamps, we're going to go up by 3 decorative blocks on the right and leftmost lamp, so that we can place a piston facing up on the back of the top decorative block. Then we're going to go over by 5 more pistons, then go up by 4 temporary blocks, break out the bottom 3 so that we can place a piston facing down that is 2 blocks away from the bottom row of pistons, break out the other temporary block, and then continue placing pistons facing down that are aligned with the bottom ones. Then we're going to place redstone blocks on top of the bottom pistons and lamps next to that. Now we need to do the same thing on the other side. So starting behind the decorative block, place your 6 pistons going off to the side, then your temporary blocks so that you can place pistons facing down that are aligned with the bottom ones, then your blocks of redstone, then your lamps. And there should be 4 blocks of air in between these 2 sections of 6 right here in the middle. Then go around to the back and place blocks diagonally down from the pistons so that we can place redstone dust directly behind each piston. Now the dust will connect right there, but we don't want that. So place a solid block above that dust in order to pinch the redstone so that those lines do not connect. Then place 2 copper bulbs next to the redstone lamps with 2 blocks diagonally behind those bulbs. Then turn around and face the back, place comparators next to the bulbs, then place repeaters in front of those comparators facing the outsides of the machine, going into solid blocks directly above the centermost dust attached to the bottom pistons. Then behind the top pistons, we're going to go back by 2 blocks, break out the block that's touching the pistons, then go over with these blocks so that we can place a redstone torch directly behind every single piston, like so. And then do this on both sides. So we're just going to carry this all the way over here, then break out the middle 4, so that we're left with 6 blocks with 6 torches powering all 12 of the top pistons. But now we're going to come down here so that we can place a temporary block going down from that row that we just placed, then go back by 4 blocks. And we're going to place a target block on the third one from the front, right here. Then we're going to break out the middle 2 so that we're left with these 3 blocks like so, and we're going to carry this all the way across directly behind all 12 of the top pistons. And as you break out the temporary blocks, be aware that some of them will probably fall into the hoppers down below. So whenever you're done, be sure to check the droppers to make sure there are no extra items in there. Remember that there should only be 6 items in this dropper. Then come back up to the top, and we're going to go diagonally up by 1 block along the back so that this row is 1 block away from our targets. Then we're going to place dust next to the targets and on top of the blocks that we just placed. And then behind the frontmost torches, we're going to place a dust on the rightmost side, then every other block. Then the same thing over here, except the dust behind the torches, we're going to start on the leftmost side. Then we're going to place 3 repeaters on each side in between the frontmost dust behind those torches. Then come over to this side so that we can place torches on the front of all the targets. Then grab your glass so that we can place glass diagonally behind all of the targets above that dust, then solid blocks above the back dust, and then diagonally up from the glass 1 block above the targets. So again, solid blocks along the back, glass in the middle, and then solid blocks 1 block up from the targets. Now place comparators on top of all of the glass, and be sure to face toward the back when placing those comparators. But then we need hoppers pointed into these blocks, just like we did on the bottom sections. But this time, we're going to build the droppers in the middle area. So go over here and place 2 temporary blocks next to these repeaters right here in the center. Then place 2 droppers on top of these that are facing up, then a dropper facing the back, then a dropper facing the hopper, and then the same thing on the other side. So 2 droppers facing up, then a dropper facing the back, then a dropper facing the hoppers, and then go back and break out your temporary blocks. And just like we did on the bottom section, now we need to place hoppers that are all going into each other, going into the bottommost dropper, like so. And do this on both sides, and then come down to the bottom here, so that we can look up and place hoppers that are going into that line of hoppers that we just placed. So make sure that all of these hoppers are going into the front, and then all of the front ones are going toward the dropper. And keep in mind that you have to aim at the top flat part of the hoppers to place hoppers next to those. But once you get that done, come back up to the top so that we can build the redstone for the droppers. So start off by placing a solid block next to the glass blocks on each side, then solid blocks diagonally down from the droppers by aiming at the sides of the redstone torch. You could always place temporary blocks if you need to. But then we're going to place 2 temporary blocks in the middle here so that we can place the rest of the components. So a comparator coming out of each bottom dropper, then jump up here and place an observer looking at each of these comparators. You'll have to crouch and kind of move off to the back corner to get these observers to face the right way, but then place your repeaters on a 3-tick delay, facing the front on top of the observers, then your redstone dust behind those, then go back to your temporary blocks so that we can place the observers looking at those repeaters, like so. Now come back over here and break out your temporary blocks, and you should be left with this. And we are almost done. Now we need to load our filter hoppers, just like we did in the bottom section. So on these top hoppers, we need to place 3 of the item in the first slot, then 1 item in all other slots, then items in the second one until 2 from the first fall through. And just like we talked about before, you can either use 6 different trash items, 1 for each hopper, or you can use 6 unique items for each first slot, and then just any junk items for the filler. But when you're done, make sure that there are 6 items in that top dropper, and 1 item in the hoppers that are above the torches. Then just do the same thing on the final section. And remember that if you're using items that stack to 64, you will have 1 item in every slot, then 18 items in the second slot, 1 item in all of the hoppers above the torches, and then 1 of each of these 6 items in this top dropper right here. But now, time to build the minecart delivery system. So just like on the bottom, we're going to place a solid block next to the hoppers with a lever on it, turn that lever on, place 2 powered rails on each side, 4 regular rails, and then a minecart with chest. Then again, place a solid block at the end of the hoppers with a lever, turn it on, 2 powered rails, 4 regular rails, and a minecart with chest. And we are so close to being done. All that's left is to tie in the redstone to the topmost droppers. So come down here to the middle where this 2 redstone dust is, and we're going to place 2 blocks in between these repeaters with dust on top. Then we're going to place a block on the left side so it pinches that redstone. Then we're going to go over by 1 block, then place dust in this hole, and on top of those 2 blocks that you just placed. Then where this dust connected, place a solid block to pinch it, then go up diagonally by 1 more, break out the temporary block, go over toward the pistons, diagonally up, break out the temporary block, then go diagonally up toward the dropper, then place 1 more block like so. Now we're going to place a repeater on maximum delay next to this dropper, then redstone dust on top of the droppers, and on each of these blocks that you just placed, connecting down to that bottom dust. Now on the other side, we're going to place a redstone dust on top of this block that's next to the block coming out of the repeater, then a block that's next to that dust touching that repeater, break out the temporary block, then we're going to go back by 1 block like so, then place redstone dust on top of these 2 blocks so that it connects to the first dust that you placed. Now we're going to go diagonally up by 1, diagonally front by 1, diagonally front by another 1, then diagonally up to the side toward the pistons, then just go over toward the droppers like so. Then again, place a repeater on a maximum delay next to the droppers, redstone dust on top of the droppers, and then all the way down our little block staircase like so. So those 2 lines that you just placed should not connect to any other dust, and now we are officially done! We just need to place buttons on the side of these bulbs right here, and we're done. So now test it, be sure to poke the button, make sure that all of the lights turn off and then a single light turns on onto each section, and be sure to test all of the locking mechanisms. But also stay tuned because I do have a few problem solving things just in case something does go wrong. But after you test it a few times to make sure that everything works, be sure to go and double check your droppers to make sure that the temporary blocks that you were breaking out didn't fall down into the hoppers. Remember that there should only be 6 items in this top dropper that correspond with your hopper filters. Now this is very, very important. Do not spam click your dice roll button. If you press it too quickly, there is a chance that the dropper will drop an extra item that doesn't get picked up by the minecart with chest. And if this happens, that dice will no longer be able to roll the number that corresponds with that item until you go in and fix it by replacing that item in this topmost dropper. Luckily, there is a pretty easy way to prevent this. All you have to do is on the dice roll button, make sure that button is a wooden button. If you use a wooden button, the odds are really good that this does not happen. I tried this many times, and I never ended up with an item that got lost, because the wooden button takes longer to press than a stone button does. So in general, it tends to not dispense an extra item into the hoppers, but it still will dispense an extra item into the minecart, which is also bad. You don't want to spam click the button. You know, if you end up with multiple items in the minecart with chest, what will sometimes happen is the items will start backing up into this bottommost dropper. You know, this game is designed for Yahtzee, not to just spam click the button. So if this happens, all you have to do is go and spam click this comparator to turn it from subtraction mode on and off, and it will load all of the items back into the dropper that they're supposed to be in. Now you technically could fix this by making the comparator turn itself off. You know, by adding a little bit of redstone in between each one so that the comparator turns itself off. This will guarantee that no items ever get stuck in the bottom dropper. But again, this is meant for Yahtzee, and as long as you use it for Yahtzee, there's no way that you will ever press the button too quickly. Because basically all you have to do is wait for just a split second after the light comes on. Like basically, I mean literally just a half a second after the lights turn back on, it's safe to press the button again. So the only time this will mess up is if you press the button immediately after the button resets itself. And there's no reason to do that because you wouldn't even be able to see what numbers you rolled. And this won't always happen. Even if the button is pressed immediately after it resets, you basically have to roll like a 6 and then a 1 in order for it to actually break. But if you have a troublemaker who constantly breaks it or something, let me know and I will give you a permanent solution that you can build. For the simple design that doesn't have a visual indicator, here is what you will need. Now the dust and the blocks are not in exact quantities. You'll actually only need a handful of both. And then the redstone lamps are totally optional. They give you a visual indicator of which ones are locked. Then the targets can actually be exchanged for redstone repeaters. So if you want to use 5 more repeaters instead of target blocks, you totally can. But everything else is in exact quantities, and you will need some sort of visual guide to know what number has been rolled, so I recommend the number banners. The build area is going to be 3 by 6, and you're going to dig down 2 on the back 2 rows. So the front row is going to have the levers and the button, and then the back 2 rows, you're going to dig down 3. And then the button can go on either side. It can go on the left or the right. The button is what rolls all of the dice, and the levers are what locks individual dice. Start off by going to where your button is and break out the block under that. Place redstone dust there, and then redstone dust along the front wall, then target blocks along the back. If you don't want to use targets, you can exchange that dust for repeaters going into solid blocks instead of the targets, and then put a line of redstone dust behind the repeaters. Totally up to you. Either way, we're going to place solid blocks above the dust or above the repeaters if that's what you used. Then we're going to place repeaters on top of these blocks facing the back. Then on top of the targets or solid blocks, place redstone torches, then solid blocks on top of those torches. Then on top of these blocks, we're going to place more torches, and then more blocks on top of those. Then on top of these, we're going to place more torches, and that's it. Now we need to place in our droppers. So we're going to go down here and place droppers facing down directly next to the topmost redstone torches. Make sure that all of those droppers are facing down. But then we're going to place lamps on top of the repeaters, and if you don't want to use lamps, you can just use any block that you want to. These lamps just give you a visual indicator of which ones are locked. But technically, you could always just look at the levers to see which dice are locked if you don't want to use lamps. But now we need to place droppers facing up underneath the droppers facing down. So come up here, crouch, and move over to the edge so that you can place droppers facing up into the droppers facing down. Make sure that all of these droppers are facing into each other. And that's it. All that's left is to load the droppers. So in the topmost droppers, we want to put one of each of our visual items. So we're going to have 6 items that represent 1 through 6, like a dice being rolled. So we want one of each of those items in each of the top droppers. So I recommend using banners because it's really easy to see what numbers those are, but you could always just name items or something like that. But once you've loaded the top droppers, now just poke the button a single time and it will load a single item into the bottom droppers. And now from here on out, there should always be a single item in the bottom droppers. So anytime that you poke the button, it will roll all 5 of the dice, and then if you flick the levers, it will lock in that specific dice. So if we lock in the 2 right here, this one will stay as a 2, but the other ones will get rolled. Now all that's left is to decorate. Now one thing I do recommend is to cover up the topmost droppers to avoid confusion. You can either use solid blocks, but I would actually recommend using stairs just because they're less intrusive. And that's it for the simple design. But now let's talk a little bit about the scoreboard. So I recommend doing something like this with item frames and number banners, and then signs to indicate which category is which. Now you could make this 7 high, but then it's a little hard to reach if it's 7 high. Plus, with having 6 high, that is equal to the first page of categories. And since the first page gives you a bonus if you reach a certain score, it's nice to have that completely separate from all the other categories. I also recommend having different colors for different players, and a chest nearby that contains all of your number banners. Make sure to have tons and tons of number banners so that each player can just take, a full stack of each number so that they have it on hand and can enter their score after they've calculated their total roll. And there are basically 18 different scoring categories, but the first 6 kind of need to be separate since you can get a bonus by scoring a certain amount on them. Here is a chopped up version of a Yahtzee score sheet for you to copy onto signs. Now as for the layout of your scoreboard, you could give each player their own scoreboard just by copying the signs, or you could use colors to separate out the players, like right here we have a blue player and a red player, and you could always add more columns of color. Or you could add another scoreboard on the other side, or you could build a scoreboard directly across from the dice. All of that is totally up to you and how many players you think will be playing your Yahtzee. Personally, I like the idea of this 2-player scoreboard right here that has a blue player and a red player. And if I wanted to add more, I would just copy this onto the other side. But now let's go over how you make all of the number banners since they are very important for this. So here are some pictures of the patterns in case you want to take a screenshot or something. The order that you add the patterns is from bottom to top, so the bottommost one says what color of banner you need to start with. And of course, you can use any color that you want to. The blue represents the background and the white represents the number itself. And that's all we got for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and I hope it all made sense. If you liked it, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated and allows me to continue making videos. And be sure to leave me a comment. Any sort of critique, question, or request is greatly appreciated, and I will do my best to help you out. Or if you don't know what to say, just tell me hi. I would love to hear from you either way. I built so many versions of this thing, trying to find the best and easiest one to show to you. I also had problems with my editing software, and it almost corrupted the entire thing that I had edited. I had to spend like 3.5 hours trying to recover the work that I had already put in. But I'm also designing a battleship game that uses commands, so that tutorial should be coming soon. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to check out some of my other content. Just know that I have tutorials for everything. Whether you want to learn redstone, learn commands, build farms, or build mini-games, it is all somewhere buried in there. So feel free to check those out, I would greatly appreciate it. And again, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope to see you again soon, but until then, I've been your host, OmLedu, building a fun mini game with you, and reminding you, as always, don't forget to have fun. Bye bye!